Good afternoon. Good afternoon. It seems like we're still sleeping. Good afternoon. Can everybody stand up? Maybe you all rise. We'll do a quick exercise. Can you all rise? Thank you. Please stand up. I know you've been sitting down. Humans are not meant to sit. We're meant to walk around. Thank you. So just a quick exercise. Straighten your hands. I know you need to fly. You know why you need to fly, right? This is not producing greenhouse gases. It is free. All right. Raise it up. Down. Slowly. Breathe in. Out. In. Out. And then clap for yourself. Yeah, that's to get you up. Thank you very much. It's an opportunity to speak with you today. My name is Michael Oluwagbemi. I sit on the board of the Rural Electrification Agency in Nigeria. In my role, I primarily offer input and insights on behalf of the Nigerian people as to how we electrify 50% of Nigeria's population. Half of Nigeria's population lives in the rural areas. Another 50% lives in the urban area. Of course, these has changed quite a bit in the last 60 years. At independence in 1960, Nigeria had 98% of our population living in the rural areas. But in the last 60 years, Nigeria has rapidly urbanized. A country of 55 million at independence today is a country of 208 million. The 208 million people, at independence, 55 million people, about 50 million of the 55 lived in rural areas. But today, a country of 208 million, about 105 million live in the rural areas. So even though proportionally speaking, less Nigerian lives in the rural areas, absolutely speaking, more people live in the rural areas of Nigeria today. It's one of the fastest growing countries in terms of population, but also a fast growing country in terms of the economy. And so what happens to Nigeria actually is probably an indicator of what's going to happen in Africa as a whole. So that's why I think it's important that we give and provide some kind of insight as to what and how. Next slide, please. I think you have control. Okay, good. I do have control. Yes. We always allow people. Thank you. So, anytime I visit a new country or a new place, I always try to look around for things that we share, because I think humanity is about shared experience. So yesterday I got into, I hope I'm saying this right, Gdynia? Okay. I got in on Monday night, which happens to be an important day for me personally, June 12th. For my country, Nigeria, June 12th is celebrated as Democracy Day because June 12, 1993, exactly 30 years ago, Nigerians went to the poll to restore democracy after about 20 years of military dictatorship. However, that election was annulled, and the president that the country elected was imprisoned, and he died in jail. 6 years later, fast forward 6 years later, in 1999, Nigeria ultimately became democratic. And about 10 years ago, we decided to commemorate that day, June 12th, as Democracy Day. So in Nigeria, June 12th is a public holiday, and that was the day I flew in to Gdynia. But beyond that, personally speaking, my parents, both my mother and my father, were born on June 12th. They both also got married on June 12th. So in my family, June 12th is not just a democracy day or a public holiday. It's also what we call the Oluwagbemi Day, because our parents were born on June 12th and they got married on June 12th. So I flew in on Monday, having missed an Oluwagbemi Day, because I'm coming here to have conference with you. So I decided to take yesterday off as my own holiday. And in doing so, looking around town, I was seeking shared experience with this new, they told me relatively, Gdynia and many other cities around there, relatively new in European terms. And I went to the museum, the City Museum, and lo and behold, somewhere in the City Museum, I found this map. And this map, actually, this was me yesterday, and that's showing Lagos. I'm sure you can see Lagos there, which used to be the former capital of Nigeria. And the story was a certain ship that was built in the city of Gdynia during World War II used to sail with those people who were resisting the Nazis, and actually sailed from here around the world, transporting soldiers from the British Empire, including Nigerian soldiers, as well as armory and equipment in defense of democracy and liberty. And one of the ports where they stopped was the port of Lagos, ferrying men and equipment in defense of liberty and freedom. So even seemingly far and distant city like Gdynia shares something in common with Nigeria, a city of Lagos in Nigeria. And that tells us about our shared humanity. And when we are talking about issues around energy, issues around electrification, issues around power, we're talking about the humanity, our ability as humans to be able to live life fully and effectively and fulfilled. To that young boy that was born in a village somewhere in the backwaters of Africa that was not able to have an opportunity to have electricity, education can be very challenging. Even if he gets that education because he's using the moonlight to study, study also shows that over his life, towards the end of his life, he's going to be suffering from a lot of eye problems because of illumination issues. And that's just giving you one tiny example of how electrification impacts the quality of life. And so for us at the Rural Electrification Agency, we are always concerned, and we are concerned about how do we bring electricity to these rural areas, backwaters, places that have not seen electricity since the existence of mankind. How do we bring development, leveraging electricity? Because power ultimately is also the driver of industrialization, the driver of development. And so today, I'll be talking a little bit about Nigeria, gas and gas opportunities in Nigeria. I'll be talking a little bit about the challenges of electricity. It's good that my friend Paul Avada actually sets the base by showing you that statistics that looks very, very horrible about how many Nigerians and the rest of the world do not have access to electricity, and how do we get to them. And then I'll be talking about your beyond. I always think about challenges as also opportunities. How do we use this massive challenge, square it with the reality on ground, and leverage it into an opportunity, not just for Africans or for folks in Nigeria, but for everybody else in the room, those of us who belong to this set, the scientific, engineering, and technical community. Of course, we'll now be talking, just generally speaking, about some of the policies that Nigeria has put in place in the last 5 to 8 years under the immediately past administration, because we got a new president just 2 weeks ago, being the 7th transfer of power from one person to the other since 1999, being a democracy. Nigeria is Africa's and probably the world's gas province. Any statistics you see here about gas in Nigeria is highly limited by the amount of exploration that has already gone on. There's literally not a single place in Nigeria that does not have gas under its feet. Today, it is regarded as a top gas reserve country and producing country in the world. I think it's number 4 or 5, if I'm correct. Has about 209,000 cubic feet of gas reserves, natural gas reserves in the ground. Nigeria's gas production today, largely by and large, is associated, meaning that when crude oil is being produced, Nigeria, by the way, is also a top crude oil producer. The gas that is associated with the crude oil is what we regard as gas production today. Hardly does Nigeria go after gas as a result for production, for exploration, development, and production. So most of the gas that we have and we produce and we export or use or utilize in Nigeria today is what you call associated gas. However, there's the word, I use the word waste, of course, in nod to bioethane that we're talking about today, methane we're talking about today, but also the reality that a lot of the gas that Nigeria produces today is wasted. About 1.7 trillion cubic feet of natural gas is what we have, and $20 billion is worth of gas is what fled in 2018 alone. This, of course, translates to Nigeria being one of the top 7 gas flares in the world. Think about that again. Massive gas reserves, massive population without electricity, yet also a massive flare or waste of gas. So how do you square these 3 realities? And is the concept of what we call stranded gas. You remember I told you about most of Nigerian gas being associated. Nigeria's oil production, that's crude oil production in Nigeria, is often in areas where you can hardly access, in the creeks, deep offshore, very difficult terrains. Now, what that means is that once the gas is found, it is often convenient for these associated gas producers, whose primary goal is crude oil. It's convenient for them to just flare the gas, rather than actually trying to turn the gas to something useful, both for the local economy and for the entire country or the world. So the likelihood of associated gas becoming piped gas that we can use to industrialize is low as a result of the terrain and where it is found and the method with which it was found. And of course, that brings me to the issue of gas utilization. By and large, most of Nigeria's gas use internally is dedicated to power. So the vast majority of Nigeria's power, probably about over 80% of it today, is derived from gas production. However, the balance of the gas that cannot be gotten mainland, where it can be utilized, get flared. Of course, a vast majority, a good amount of Nigeria's gas also make its way to international markets through the NLNG. Nigeria has the 7th train being developed now at Bonny Island that makes it to the rest of the world. This is probably another method in which Nigeria's gas could or will be utilized. However, Nigeria continues to depend very much on 2 primary sources of power, which is the reason why you continue to see a divergence between its large gas resources and its high numbers of population that continues to remain in darkness because of lack of electricity. Hydro and thermal plants dominate the what we call the grid system. But what we realize is that for the purpose of rural electrification, it will be very difficult to extend this grid to where these 50% of the population continue to live, or 60% of the population that live beyond the grid live. Nigeria's grid currently covers about 42% of the population, and significant investment will be required, which might not be economically possible or sustainable to extend the grid to where the rural population can be found. Naturally, of course, this has led to an increasing deficit and gap between electricity required and electricity that we can obtain. That graph there is a graph that was put together by Professor Aluko, and I like it because it shows you very much the gap between what is required, which is about 25,000 megawatts of production, and what is actually being produced today, which is about 3,000 megawatts. So you can see a wide distance. Of course, there's also the issue around maintaining the technology that actually goes into electricity production, because there's about 12,000 megawatts of generation plant capacity, but how do you maintain and keep that capacity up is also another issue on the grid. However, the need is 25,000. What is being produced is about 3,700, maybe 4,000 megawatts. So you are talking about a 21,000 megawatt generating capacity divergence. These are actually probably underestimate the other problems around transmission, around distribution in terms of the infrastructure and the quality of the infrastructure to do so. So we are actually talking about a big problem that requires big thinking, and maybe not just big thinking, also new thinking. Because when you consider the fact that 50% of the population that lives in the rural areas are also the ones that are primarily responsible for the food production systems and the food security of the country, then you understand that this becomes an existential threat to the country's population if we do not find a way to get them electricity. I think I spoke to you a little bit about this already and talked quite a bit about the population that are not connected to the grid, as well as the rural populations that are without power. Currently, in Nigeria, the Rural Electrification Agency is just one of many actors in the entire system, and this is where we sit. We are acting on behalf of the Nigerian government to electrify 50% of the population. But we are also acting in concert with a lot of other private sector operators, not necessarily. Nigeria's power sector is highly liberalized already. The distribution companies are privately owned. The transmission company remains government owned, while the generating companies are also privately owned. However, if we depend on this liberalized system, there is no economic impetus to extend the existing grid that covers just 40% of the population to these rural areas. So this is where the Rural Electrification Agency comes in play. The agency has the mandate not just for rural electrification, by the way, but under the electricity bill that was signed last week by the new President Tinubu, we also now have the mandate for renewables for the country. Nigeria had processed two new developments, one of which was a constitutional amendment that also allowed Nigeria's subnational governments. So if you're German, you understand this, a federal country. There's a central government, and then there's government of states. In some countries, they call them province. And these governments of province have about equal, if not even more power over the economy, as the central government does. With the new constitutional amendment, these subnational governments can also now regulate their local market, provide power at the local level. But what was introduced with the electricity bill that was signed last week was that now there will be renewable energy targets that will be set at the national level that all IPP generated companies as well as distribution companies have to meet. And because the Rural Electrification Agency is charged with these renewable energy targets, we also, it provides us another additional opportunity for revenue that we can then use to electrify the rural areas. So let me take a step back to explain. The REA today obtains its revenue primarily from a specific tariff that is added, a subvention tariff that is added to what everybody pays in the rural areas all around Nigeria. So if you're getting power from the grid, a certain percentage of your electricity bill goes into a fund that is called the Rural Electrification Fund. And in addition to that, all fines by the Nigerian Electric Regulatory Commission on any actor within the electricity system also goes into the same fund. In addition to that, certain appropriation from the national budget also goes into the fund. In addition to that, grants, loans, and subsidies that are charged by the federal government on certain activities also goes into the fund. The idea is that this pool of fund allows the Rural Electrification Agency to do three things. One, provide capital subsidies to developers that are trying to get into the rural electrification game or into the renewable energy game to be able to develop large mini-grid, off-grid, or inter-network grid systems to serve rural areas. Two, it also provides grid extension projects. So projects that actually extend the grid from the 42% of the population where it currently covers to progressively expand that grid to cover areas where the grid does not get to. So somebody has to pay for it, and the rural electrification does that. And thirdly, it also invests in research and development as well as a project that allows renewables to be affordable at the in the rural areas. So this includes projects that deploy photovoltaic cells, that's solar projects, small hydro projects, SHEP projects in agricultural communities, projects that actually deploy, say, in healthcare facilities during COVID-19. There was about 500 hospitals and primary healthcare centers were covered by projects that to serve communities that then needed the rural primary healthcare centers to be powered during COVID-19, of course, to stem off the pandemic. So these are some of the things that the Rural Electrification Agency, leveraging the Rural Electrification Fund, does in the country. Of course, in doing this work, we continue to face great challenges, as you can only imagine. I always say that it is very easy. It's very easy to complain about the job until you have it, right? This is a big country of 208 million people, relatively young country, 60 plus years, and with a lot of needs. So electrification needs is competing with other infrastructure, pipeline, airports, roads. All of these things are just being built in this country. And yet it's Africa's largest economy and also has its largest population. So they are competing it. And so we need to find a way at the agency to situate the need of the rural population within the context of the overall need of the country. First and foremost is that we have challenges relating to transmission and distribution loss on the main grid itself. The main grid itself had not received the most optimal investment in the last 60 years as a result of various issues, as you can imagine, including economic up and downs over the last 30 to 40 years. So the grid itself is weak, and we are here charged with extending the grid on one hand, while also providing for the needs of the rural areas that doesn't have the grid. The third issue is also the issue of alternative energy. How do we bring alternative energy to play and to make sure that they can compete with the fossil fuel or the hydro that is widely available that provides 20%, while gas provides 80%? How do we make alternative energy available to the rural population? We also have a huge metering issue, both on the grid and off the grid. People have, over the years, seen electricity as a social good. So it's taken a lot of mentality to tell people that you have to pay for this thing. We're a country that has transitioned through various types of government, especially the military. And you know what the military government does is they come in and try to present some things as free in order to get the buy-in of the larger population. So if you lived under military rule prior to 1999, as we did for 30 years, there were a lot of freebies, and one of it was energy. So Nigerians were used to just getting electricity without paying for it. So it's challenging now to tell them and say, you have to pay for this electricity in order to continue to receive it. So this is a big issue, and metering is a way that we are trying to overcome this gap, and we'll continue to fight and work to overcome it. Of course, the insufficient funding. And for us, at the end of the day, at the agency, we recognize that all the money will not come from the government, and which is why in the recent 2020-21, we developed what we call our 10-year roadmap as an agency to begin to attract private sector funding into the industry, generally speaking, in order to make rural electrification possible. The first stage was recently we signed a $1 billion facility with the World Bank and African Development Bank to encourage what we call the performance-based grant system to developing mini-grid and inter-network grid in rural areas. And what we found in the first case studies that we actually implemented in over about 4 projects in Nigeria was that even in the rural areas, folks are willing to pay for their electricity, provided they can be guaranteed of the demand, and also that we can link the demand to the availability. What do I mean? It works almost like a satellite system where you pay, and once you run down your meter, it stops working. And the moment you load again, then it starts working. It's prepaid, right? And 99.99% of the time, we had no default, compared to the urban area where they do postpaid, and you have up to sometimes 30-40% default on metering. And sometimes you even have issues around meter bypass, electricity thefts, and energy theft. We did not have those issues in the rural areas where we first conducted some of these studies. Because you have to understand that there is a gap in the rural area currently, and the business as usual for them is using a whole lot more expensive form of power, which is your petrol generators. Your petrol generators today, in consequential terms, in the rural area cost about 50 cents per kilowatt hour. Can you imagine paying 50 cents per kilowatt hour for electricity? So when we go there and offer them mini grids powered on solar or small hydro at 15 cents or 10 cents, some you might even consider expensive in the city, but they see that this power is available, is reliable, and it comes once they pay for it. They are willing to pay for it, and default is so low. So we are beginning to realize that the rumor is not true, that there's no money in the rural areas. Let's remember most of them are farmers like myself. I'm also a rancher, by the way. There's money in agriculture. But the problem is I cannot make money in agriculture if my food is wasted, if what I produce cannot get to the market, if I do not process what I produce. So I'm willing to pay for the cost of electricity that is reliable, that is accessible, that is useful for me. And that is what we found in our case studies. Let me speak to the overall availability of renewables just across Nigeria. Both wind and sunlight is abundant across the country. You can imagine a country just in between the equator and the Sahara Desert, so there's no scarcity of radiation to power electricity. In addition to that, I was just having a discussion with a few friends outside the conference and telling them that Nigeria is an hydrological paradise. It's a country of over 250 rivers, and it's actually named after a river, River Niger. And all across Nigeria, rivers cutting left, right, and center streams that can also be useful for small hydro. And also with an abundant population of over 200 million people, a lot of bio-waste is produced. And so naturally speaking, there's a base to produce biogas for the population to be powered. So when you combine all of these potential sources, including wind, a country that has long coastline across the Atlantic, then you realize that renewables can find home in Nigeria with sufficient and sustained investment, and which is, I think, is the key word, investment. So we are moving away from the era of considering and talking about aid and grants to saying there's a market of 21,000 megawatt gap. The economy is being opened up with both the constitutional amendment and a new electricity bill. There's consistency of policy around metering. There's also consistent focus of the economy and the agency around rural electrification. We see the market, we've proven the market. We continue to deploy mini grids. I think the agency this year we're developing or deploying about 400 grids through private developers who are operating their own businesses, and we'll be metering the population. And we continue to prove that the market exists and all that is required is an investment. As at 2021, bioenergy capacity in Nigeria, however, remains very small, just 10 megawatts of the 3,800 megawatts approximately that is being produced to the grid. There's actually a potential and a need that we can move this number quite dramatically up. if we invest in the biogas sector, which I believe those of you in the room are interested in. Like I said, with abundant population across the country and huge amount of waste that is being let out as a result of the high population, there's no scarcity of resources that we can use to produce biogas in the country. For example, the agency last year did a pilot in a large cattle market in the northeastern part of the country, where they bring in about 5,000 cattle a day for sales. In this cattle market, the dungs that is being produced by the animals was converted to a 0.5 megawatt power production skid, which then powers not just the market, but the surrounding communities. And again, the folks in that community pay for the power. So that shows you what can be done. And there are more than 200, 300 markets of this similar nature across the country. And this can just be just a pilot case for the overall country. There are, of course, opportunities for hybridization, and I speak to these as, of course, being an electrical engineer myself, that I've done and implemented hybrid projects across the country in my own private capacity. The reality is that while solar can provide the base electricity during the daytime, you need or require a huge amount of battery system in order to be able to sustain it. And what we found out is that if we're able to hybridize solar power with either biogas or small hydroelectric systems, then you can reduce the battery systems that you have to build with them. This is something that we've done in I think we did about 10 pilots last year of hybrid projects in the agency, and we're looking to scale those. So what becomes obvious is that during the daytime, when electricity is most required, there's sunlight and it can power the solar system. During nighttime, when there's no solar radiation, small hydro or biogas can provide that levelized power over the nighttime, and thus reduce the size of the battery systems that we're deploying, and reducing and making it a lot cheaper to deploy solar systems, photovoltaic cells across the country. The configuration, of course, of these, for those who are interested, is shown. Combining multiple sources to deliver non-intermittent electric power. Luckily, of course, most of human activities take place in the daytime, especially in our rural areas. So hybridizing with both biogas and hydro is definitely a good idea. In Nigeria, we also have quite a bit of stranded gas, as I've said. There is opportunity to leverage and utilize those. Some of these are located in the creeks, in the mangrove swamps. Some of them are located in far-off areas. You'll be surprised that areas where they are flaring gas also coincide with areas that do not have electricity. So how do you bring skids on site, mobile skids on site, to actually convert stranded gas to electricity? Is something that is also of interest to us at the agency. And of course, we are looking to partner with the community to find how to achieve that in the best possible ways. There are policies that we already have in place that is encouraging investors as well as development partners like yourself. There's the National Renewable Energy and Efficiency Policy, which has been in place since 2005 and was renewed in 2013 and 2025. We are looking to also have an upgrade. The Renewable Energy Master Plan, the REMP was the one developed in 2005, while the NEREP was the 2013. We also have the feed-in tariff system, which was launched in 2015, which also allows you to be able to sell your excess power into the grid and to be able to then monetize your excess power as well. There's also the Green Bond Program that the federal government launched in 2017 that provides a source of finance for renewable energy projects, and we continue to find ways to partner with the industry. Beyond these policies that I've listed out, I also, of course, mentioned the two key legal instruments that were upgraded in the last two months. The constitutional amendments that allows you to now partner not just with the federal government of Nigeria, but also the 37 subnational governments to produce electricity and to satisfy this huge 21,000 megawatt electric production gap. The second, of course, is the electricity bill that then helps to regulate what happens in the sector and was signed just last week. There's a lot that is going on in the marketplace, but I'm very, very certain that with your support and with your help, we can make sure that we get the over 85 million Nigerians living without power to get power in the next 20 years. In the agency, we have various programs that we use to partners, and some of these are available. This presentation, I believe, we made available. Paula and I believe we can make this available to the audience. All of these programs, some of them are direct funding to developers. Some of them provide subsidy to developers. We call it capital subsidies. Some of them are performance-based grants that pays up to 70% of the capital requirements of the project, provided you are actually connecting. So we pay you based on connection. So if you have, for every connection, we pay $500 in the rural areas. So these programs are available for developers that are coming to partner with the agency. For example, we have the IMAS, the Interconnected Mini Grid Acceleration Scheme. This actually allows you to produce power even in areas that already have the grid, but they do not have the juice. So you have a lot of dead legs, areas where the grid has been extended, but there's no electric power actually being produced to feed those areas. And people are willing. Again, with a massive population, fast-growing economy, Nigeria is open for business. And the Rural Electrification Agency, working with our partners, the UNDP, the African Development Bank, the World Bank that supports the Energizing Education Program, as well as the Rockefeller Foundation that's supporting the Energizing Economics Program that works in agriculture, provides not just grants, but also loans, as well as direct investment, for example, through our Rural Electrification Fund, working with developers and private investors. Of course, this more than brings me to the end of this presentation. What I want to emphasize is that we are moving towards a more private market in the country, but we are also moving towards a more sustainable market. And we cannot get there without the help and support of our partners like yourself. With bountiful stranded gas and renewable energy, Nigeria is a suitable destination for investments. It's also a suitable destination for your knowledge, your capacity. We are open for business, and if you do catch me on the sideline of the conference, do let us talk. You can catch me online at Busanga on Facebook, as well as on Twitter, as well as on LinkedIn. You can also connect with me with any of these telephone number. I'm on WhatsApp as well. Thank you very much, and I look forward to an engaging session at this conference. God bless.
Thank you very much, Michael. Do we have any questions at all? Actually, I do have one, and you have to excuse my ignorance. Gas flaring. I read a statistic some time ago said that any one time there are a minimum of 10,000 gas flares going on in the world, enough to power the whole of sub-Sahara Africa. I don't actually know the reasons. Is it to do with equipment or pressure, or why? Do you know why that is? Why gas flaring is actually done?
All right. Not a problem. The nature, so I told you my background is oil and gas. So there's a reason why gas is flared in the first instance, because it's associated, right? So you've drilled the oil well and you have gas coming out, but you do not have a financial or economic case for capturing the gas and utilizing it or selling it, or because there's no infrastructure into which you needed to put that associated gas. So the options are usually two. You flare the gas and pay an economic penalty, or you give the gas away free to somebody that has provided some kind of mobile infrastructure around the area where this gas is being produced. For most oil and gas companies, at least in the Bight of Guinea, where Nigeria is located, especially where gas is found sometime in very difficult physical environments, mangrove swamp, far deep water offshore, it's just more suitable and it's more economic for them to pay the penalty and just flare the gas. And yes, it is true that the fundamental technical answer to your question when you talked about pressure is that yes, gas does put pressure on the well, and you need to let it out, so letting off the pressure. But there are many other uses of gas in an oil well that we could find uses for if we want to, including even helping to improve the economics of the oil well itself. But I do not think that regulators have just been hard enough on gas flares also, and make it less economic to flare the gas than to utilize the gas or to build the infrastructure to eliminate gas flaring.
Yeah. Great, thank you. That was a good explanation. Any other questions?
So, Michael, thank you very much for this insider, more or less, information. One question. We do see the gap between potential and the demand. So, if you could sum up in 2 or 3 sentences, what are the determinants that create this gap? What is missing? Because of course it's obvious, financial sources are important, but this is only part of the story.
Sure.
So could you please more elaborate for our better understanding, what would you need as Nigeria, as a country, as agency, to use this potential, to exploit it?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think the first thing is that in terms of the gap between potential and the demand, and why that's similarly sustained, is to understand that investors respond to clear and consistent policy, right? That's very important. And that didn't used to be there. So my second to last slide, where I pointed out to, I'm not the one up, where I pointed out to the policies that have been in place in the last, I believe, about 10 years or so, didn't used to be there. So there was a catch-up. The policy had to do a catch-up. And then operating those policies, of course, you need to consistently also tweak to make sure that the policies respond to the need of the market. So once investors see a clear policy direction towards, for example, our policy position today is that we want sustainability. We don't want to just provide electricity as a social good. That's a policy of not just the agency, but the federal government of Nigeria. And we've been very consistent with that policy in the last 10 years. Now investors are realizing, oh, they're serious about that. We are not going to allow people use power without paying for it. Then investors will get off the sideline and begin to invest. But oftentimes there's also the storytelling. So I think the reason why I think these kind of conferences are important is that it allows those of us who are involved in the policy formation and policy implementation to come and tell the story. So you wouldn't know that these policies have been in place consistently now for the last 10 years, or the even more recent legal changes, framework changes, that even allows your money to now come in and to be safe. $1 in New York and $1 in Lagos is still $1. But what the guy that owns the dollar is worried about is the safety of his dollar. So I think for us, it's about projecting and showing that your dollar of investment in Nigeria's power sector is worth it, and is worth you taking that risk, get on the plane and coming to invest in Nigeria. And I have to say, like, if you look last year, we are the largest renewable energy market in the whole of Africa at about $12 billion. And this year, we're billed to be at close to 20 to 25. And that's because of the consistent policy of the federal government around renewables and around electrification as an economic good, not a social good alone. So that has attracted investors. Unfortunately, I have to say, since I'm in the room with Europeans, of which, of course, we have long history as a continent and as a country, it is the Chinese and the Koreans that have taken advantage more so than Europeans. For some reason, the old story about Nigeria electric or power sector is still what is dominant in Europe. And the Chinese, if you look at one of the things I pointed out, were 2 or 3 pilots, one with the Koreans. I was in South Korea September of last year, and they are developing about 4 large mini grids in Nigeria as we speak. The Chinese and the Koreans and the Indians, in the forefront of taking advantage of the new policies, the new policy framework and opportunities, not just in Nigeria, I have to say, but across the continent. And I think the European Union have to wake up to participate instead of complaining. The Chinese are not going to leave. You just have to come and play. Yeah.
So I have one question. This rural electrification, do the provinces have the possibility to participate and select areas, or is it done nationally by a strategy?
All right. So the provinces, the states can participate. They can also actually regulate under the constitutional amendment the areas that they want to carve out for the purpose of mini grid access. And so now, when you come into Nigeria to invest, you don't have to deal with the federal government by itself. You have 37 other competent governments that you can engage with for the purpose of providing electricity to the rural population. However, there's a coordination at the federal level through the Nigerian Electric Regulatory Commission that provides a coordinating platform to make sure that everybody, there's no cross-walking of purposes. But the deal here is almost like a first come, first serve. I mean, if you are working through the Rural Electrification Agency, we also have a very robust sub-national engagement framework where if we think that your project makes more sense to go faster through the sub-national, we'll refer you there and we'll provide you the support. And you can still benefit from subsidies, capital subsidies at the federal level, and also take advantage of your direct bilateral agreements with state governments, that's provincial governments, as the case may be.
Then I've got another question, because I would like to use this opportunity, because I fully understand that what the investors need, or partners, investors, is some kind of security that they will be able to operate within a stable and consistent framework. Mm-hmm. So, could you please send a message to the world expressing what is this factor or element that can make people sure, potential investors sure, that they can come, invest, and they could feel safe? Are there any instruments?
Absolutely. First and foremost, I think for countries, the most important message you send is consistency, right? Since 1999, Nigeria has remained a democracy. We had our 7th transfer of power last 2 weeks ago. Powers transferred from one party to another party and back to another. I mean, so it happens smoothly every 4 years. And it's one of the largest democracies in the world. We're very proud of our democracy. It can be messy. Democracies are messy by nature. But we've consistently taken the democratic, sustainable path, because I think non-democracies, if you go into Egypt, sorry if there's an Egyptian in the room, you might get things done faster, but it can also get reversed faster. In the case of Nigeria, strong judicial system, very low government participation in the economy. The government of Nigeria is just 5% of the economy, probably one of the lowest in the world. Private sector is overwhelmingly 95% of Nigeria's economy is private sector and consumer spending driven. And the policy implementation in the last 10 years and now going to 15 has always been, with respect to electricity, has always been towards more liberalization, more private sector engagement, more investor-friendly engagement. Where we've had a little bit of issues, and it's now changing in the last under this current administration, has been in the area of foreign currency, foreign exchange regulation, which allows investors now to be able to repatriate their profits. We are also moving towards a more liberal regime. In fact, I received the news on my phone just while on the stage that the central bank has actually now allowed the currency to float just in the last 2 hours. So Nigeria is moving towards a more liberal economic consistently. So the increasing policy of the Nigerian government and the Nigerian people, as expressed by their will at the polls, is towards more open economy that encourages investments of both domestic and foreign investors. So I think that is very important to communicate out there. And Nigeria is open for business. And if you look at the telecom sector, for example, and the countries that have participated in that sector have done incredibly well because of these policies. Another sector is the startup sector, where I happen to be involved as a venture capitalist myself. Nigeria has produced 5 of the 7 unicorns on the African continent in the last 5 years, of which 3 my own firm invested in. That tells you that the country is open for business, and it would be a shame if Europe, that has been our partner for the longest, is sitting on the sideline, while the Chinese, Indians, and the Koreans are making out like a bandit.
Yes, thank you.
Great. Well, thank you again, Michael. Thank you very much.
Thank you.